Arthur Schopenhauer didn't mince words when it came to his views on women. In an era that valued gentlemanly decorum, he shattered polite conventions with unflinching pessimism, declaring that behind feminine charm often lay the raw, unfiltered force of the will. This brutally honest perspective is one few are willing to confront, yet it remains a provocative lens through which to examine desire, power, and human nature. Schopenhauer's philosophy pivots on his concept of the will, a blind, incessant striving that drives every living being. To him, human existence is a tragic dance of craving and suffering, choreographed by this insatiable force. In his essay On Women, he argues that women embody the will in its purest form. They are creatures of desire, governed by emotional flux and practical concerns rather than lofty abstractions. He claimed that their thoughts circle endlessly around comfort, children, and the social intrigues that ensure their survival. For Schopenhauer, this was not a prejudice against individuals, but an ontological insight into the feminine manifestation of the will. He went so far as to assert that woman's intellect is inferior by a full degree to that of man, suggesting that women lack the capacity for profound abstraction and philosophical insight. In his eyes, the male thinker, guided by reason, can detach himself from the will's torment, whereas the woman remains enmeshed in its ceaseless demands. Such pronouncements, understandably scandalous, reflect Schopenhauer's broader metaphysical system. He saw the highest good in aesthetic contemplation and ascetic denial of the will, pursuits he deemed largely inaccessible to women. Yet to reduce Schopenhauer's treatment of women to mere misogyny is to overlook the darker, more universal drama he depicts. He believed that in all humans lurks a tension between the individuated ego and the primal will. Women, in his schema, represent the archetypal bond with nature's cyclical rhythms: birth, nurture, decay, and rebirth. In this sense, they are neither angels nor demons, but avatars of life's raw impulse. Confronting Schopenhauer's brutal reality about women thus forces us to grapple with our own participation in the will's tragic machinery. Marriage, he warned, is perhaps the most dramatic enclosure of the will's power. When a man takes a wife, he enters into a lifelong agreement with a being whose primary vocation is to perpetuate the will through procreation. In Schopenhauer's vivid metaphor, marriage was akin to a pact with a tempest. The man gains children but loses freedom, as he becomes bound by the practical and emotional entanglements that the woman, in her service to the will, inevitably demands. He counseled prenuptial caution and, for the philosophical ascetic, celibacy, strategies to limit the will's grip. Modern readers are quick to recoil at these stark prescriptions, yet beneath the surface lies a deeper problem Schopenhauer diagnosed: the human tendency to project one's own unexamined desires onto another, thereby fueling cycles of dependency and disillusionment. In romantic infatuation, he saw a biological trick: the blitz of passion that blinds one to a partner's real nature, ensuring reproduction. Once the passion fades, the partner's practical orientation, the same orientation that secures survival, often clashes with the ego's need for freedom and esteem. Schopenhauer saw heartbreak and marital discord as inevitable fractures in the will's design. He also explored how societal norms amplify these tensions. In the salons of his day, women were trained in the arts of flirtation and social maneuvering, skills he saw as sophisticated strategies of the will. Charm, coquettishness, and emotional guile were, for Schopenhauer, manifestations of nature's cunning to secure alliance and advantage. He traced lineage from Eve's biblical stratagem to the courtly intrigues of European nobility, illustrating how feminine social intelligence has long served the will's reproductive ends. Still, Schopenhauer did not view women as mere instruments. His education in Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism, taught him to recognize the universality of suffering. In this vein, he noted that women, like men, endure pain, loss, and the existential dread of impermanence. He urged compassion, even as he urged caution. His essay on love, though pessimistic, acknowledges the profound vulnerability both sexes face when confronted with desire's siren call. At its core, his judgment is an invitation to see the will's dynamics in all human relations, not a wholesale condemnation of women. In contemporary terms, we might reinterpret Schopenhauer's insights through the lens of attachment theory and evolutionary psychology. The dance of need and freedom he described echoes the anxious avoidant dynamics modern therapists explore, the cycle of craving closeness and fearing engulfment. Today's couples often oscillate between bonded intimacy and assertive independence, embodying the very polarities Schopenhauer mapped. By recognizing these patterns as manifestations of a deeper will to life, we can cultivate awareness that tempers both neediness and reckless detachment. Moreover, Schopenhauer's stark portrayal underscores the importance of self-knowledge. He believed that only by confronting the will's demands and by practicing aesthetic or ascetic disciplines can one diminish its tyranny. For partners in a relationship, this suggests the value of individual practices that foster autonomy, meditation, creative pursuits, or reflective solitude. When each person learns to observe their own desires without immediate gratification, the relationship transcends simple reaction to the will's whims and evolves into a conscious collaboration. Critically, we must recognize the limitations and historical context of Schopenhauer's views. His estimates of gendered intellect reflect 19th-century biases rather than empirical truths. Yet the metaphysical framework he employed invites us to consider how cultural norms shape, magnify, or disguise the will's operations. The contemporary reassessment of gender roles, the rise of egalitarian ideals, and the scientific understanding of neuroplasticity all challenge the notion of fixed feminine or masculine essences. Nonetheless, the drama of desire, dependence, and freedom remains vividly relevant. In the realm of desire, Schopenhauer's brutal truth is that we often become blind to a partner's real qualities in the throes of the will's seduction. Yet he also offers a path to mitigate this blindness through self-reflection, through disciplines that transcend mere passion, and through an ethical compassion that sees the shared suffering beneath all worldly striving. By becoming aware of the will's mechanisms, we reclaim agency not by denying desire entirely, but by navigating it with lucid intention. Schopenhauer's unapologetic analysis thus stands as a mirror to our own relational patterns. It asks us to answer piercing questions. Are we drawn to another for who they truly are, or for the momentary eclipse of loneliness they offer? Do we co-create a relationship based on mutual growth, or do we unwittingly reenact primordial dramas of need and survival? In Unmasking the Will, we discover that the most daring act of love may be to love with eyes wide open, aware of suffering, yet choosing to affirm connection. Building on Schopenhauer's stark diagnosis of the will's sway in romantic entanglements, we now turn our gaze to the many modern expressions and potential subversions of that same dynamic. By tracing the will through contemporary relationships, attachments, and cultural scripts, we can deepen our understanding of Schopenhauer's legacy and discover ways to cultivate greater autonomy and compassion. The will in online dating. In the digital age, the will manifests through swipes, likes, and algorithmic matches. Dating apps present each potential partner as a curated profile, a condensed projection of desire designed to prompt immediate attraction. Schopenhauer would recognize this as a turbocharged arena of will-driven craving. The more options we perceive, the more our desire intensifies, and the more we chase ephemeral highs. The paradox of choice looms large, confronted with endless profile to coup attachment styles and the will. Modern psychology has mapped the terrain of attachment: secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized, revealing how early experiences shape our dance with closeness and autonomy. In Schopenhauer's terms, an anxious attachment reflects an over-identification with the will. The craving for union becomes so intense that it consumes the self. Conversely, an avoidant attachment embodies a fear of the will's invasive demands. The dread of intimacy leads to rigid self-sufficiency. Recognizing one's default style is the first step toward Schopenhauerian wisdom. An anxiously attached individual might practice intentional solitude, embracing creative or contemplative pursuits that cultivate self-reliance without descending into isolation. An avoidantly attached person might experiment with small, incremental disclosures of vulnerability, sharing a fleeting insecurity to test the waters of genuine connection. These practices mirror the ascetic path, neither indulging nor repressing the will, but observing its tides and choosing responses rather than reflexes. Desire, disappointment, and compassion. Schopenhauer famously wrote that every love affair is a wound, for the will's fires inevitably cool, revealing the beloved's imperfections and the limitations of all objects of desire. In contemporary terms, this is the familiar cycle of honeymoon highs followed by disenchantment. Instead of denying this cycle, we can learn from Schopenhauer to greet disappointment with compassion. Recognize that the initial spark was never an eternal state, but a transient flare of the will's intensity. When disappointment arises, when a partner's habits grate or affection wanes, we can pause and reflect. What was I projecting onto this person? What needs remain unfulfilled within me? By owning our part in the cycle, we prevent the turn from disappointment to resentment. Compassion then becomes the salve, not only for our bruised ego, but for the shared wounds of both partners. In this way, the will's harsh lessons transform into opportunities for deeper empathy. Rethinking romance. Beyond the will. Schopenhauer's critique might leave us disillusioned with conventional romance, yet it also invites us to imagine alternatives. If marriage and lifelong partnerships often serve the will's directives, economic security, social status, biological continuation, what forms of relationship honor freedom and conscious choice? Polyamory, chosen solitudes, creative co-ventures, and intentional communities offer models that resist the will's default script. These structures foreground negotiated boundaries, shared projects, and periodic reassessment, rather than enshrined contractual permanence. Such arrangements demand levels of communication and self-knowledge that echo Schopenhauer's call for self-mastery. They flourish not because they abolish desire, but because they make desire explicit and subject to collective reflection. In doing so, they transform the will from an unseen tyrant into a transparent collaborator, a force that, when brought into consciousness, can fuel mutual growth rather than covert manipulation. The aesthetic liberation central to Schopenhauer's hopeful vision was art's power to suspend the will's tyranny, granting temporary respite through disinterested contemplation. In relationships, we can cultivate aesthetic moments, shared experiences that lift us beyond the fray of desire. Attending a classical concert, wandering a museum of abstract sculpture, or simply lying under a starlit sky can open a space where partners encounter one another outside the relentless push of need. These aesthetic interludes remind us that we are not only desiring machines, but also perceiving spirits. By weaving such experiences into the fabric of our love lives, we create sanctuaries of shared stillness. In these pockets, the will retreats, and two individuals can glimpse a deeper unity, one that arises not from possession, but from mutual wonder. Schopenhauer revisited critique and nuance. While Schopenhauer's insights crack open the machinery of desire, they also risk ossifying gender into static archetypes. Modern readers must temper his sweeping generalizations with evolving understandings of gender fluidity, intersectionality, and the social construction of roles. The feminine will, he described, is as much a product of 19th century norms as it is an ontological constant. Today, both women and men navigate a spectrum of drives and identities that transcend his binary mapping. Moreover, advancements in neuroscience reveal that craving and attachment are mediated by neurochemical circuits amenable to transformation through therapy, mindfulness, and loving practice. The will, once thought an immutable metaphysical force, now appears in part as a malleable set of learned patterns. This does not negate Schopenhauer's core insight that unexamined drives lead to suffering, but it does expand our toolkit for liberation toward conscious co-creation. In the final analysis, Schopenhauer's brutal reality about women and about all of us is a mirror reflecting the raw impulses that underlie our relationships. Yet he offers a path of liberation through self-knowledge, ascetic disciplines, aesthetic engagement, and compassionate action. By bringing the will into consciousness, we transform it from an unseen master into a willing participant in co-creative love. This journey is neither quick nor painless. It demands that we sit with our deepest hungers, embrace our shared vulnerability, and commit to constant reflection. We must learn to love not in spite of impermanence, but because impermanence reveals the preciousness of each moment. We must practice gratitude for the lessons of desire and disappointment alike, recognizing them as invitations to deepen our freedom. Schopenhauer's voice may sound harsh to modern ears, yet his clarion call echoes across time. Know thyself, for only in that knowledge can you find a love unchained by the capricious currents of the will. To heed that call is to undertake one of the greatest adventures of all, loving with eyes wide open, guided by truth, and sustained by the tender power of conscious choice.